Have you ever prayed the Rosary and wondered if it actually did anything? Have you ever rushed through 10 Hail Marys without thinking about a single word? And did you know that a 16th century Spanish nun saw exactly what happens when just one decade is prayed with real attention? Most people treat prayer like checking a box. Say the words, move the beads, feel vaguely Catholic, done. But Teresa of Ávila lived between 1515 and 1582 in a world that was tearing itself apart. The Protestant Reformation had split Europe. The church was bleeding members. And in the middle of all this chaos, this Spanish noblewoman entered a Carmelite convent and learned something that most Christians never discover. She learned that prayer is not about words, it is about presence. Teresa was born on March 28, 1515 in Ávila, Old Castile. Her father was Don Alonso Sanchez de Capeta. Her mother was Dona Beatriz Dávila y Ahumada. Before Teresa turned 7 years old, she was already sneaking away to pray the Rosary alone. Her mother had died when she was 14. The loss carved something deep inside her. She read lives of saints with her brother. They talked about martyrdom like other children talked about games. At 20 years old, she entered the Monastery of the Incarnation in Ávila on November 2nd, 1533, the Feast of All Souls. She said later that leaving her father's house felt like all the bones in her body were being wrenched apart. But she went anyway because something inside her knew she had to. The convent was not what you think. It was not silent prayer and holy women walking around in perfect peace. It was chaos, nuns with no actual vocations, women there because they had nowhere else to go, parlors filled with visitors and parties, young men coming and going, jewelry, fancy veils, status based on money, not holiness. Teresa tried to pray. She really did. But for 18 years she struggled. 18 years. She would sit down to pray and wait for the hour to end, listening for the clock to strike. Her mind wandered. She felt nothing. She kept going through the motions because that is what nuns do, but inside she was dry, empty, lost. If you value documented Catholic history like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Teresa's own autobiography titled Life, her book The Way of Perfection, written between 1562 and 1566 for her nuns, and the interior castle completed in 1577. These are not interpretations or legends. These are her own words, preserved in manuscripts now held in Spanish archives, including the Escorial, written under obedience to her confessors and carefully examined by church authorities. Now back to the information. Then something changed. She was around 40 years old. She had a vision while looking at an image of Christ. The image showed him wounded, suffering, and something broke open inside her. She writes about this in chapter 9 of her life. She says she felt such sorrow for how she had treated him that her heart seemed to break. She began to weep. She begged him to strengthen her once and for all so she would not offend him anymore. After that, God started visiting her with what she calls intellectual visions. Not seeing things with her eyes, seeing things impressed directly into her mind. Words that were not audible but were more real than any sound. She would know things, understand things, be filled with strength she did not have before. One night, when she was unwell, she tried to skip mental prayer. She took her rosary and decided to just say vocal prayers. Just mouth the words, keep the lips moving, do not engage the mind, stay on the surface. But God had other plans. She writes in chapter 38 of her life that she was barely a few moments into her rosary when she was violently seized in spirit. No resistance was possible. It felt like being lifted. She saw heaven. She saw her father and mother. The vision lasted no longer than it takes to say one Ave Maria, one Hail Mary, maybe 30 seconds. But it was more real than anything she had ever experienced. That was when she started to understand. The rosary is not a magic spell. It is not about how many beads you touch or how fast you can get through them. It is about what you're doing while you pray. Teresa wrote extensively about this in The Way of Perfection. She tells her nuns that mental prayer and vocal prayer must go together. You must know who you are talking to. She uses the example of a woman speaking to her husband. A good wife knows her husband. She understands him. She cares for him. She is attentive to him. When he speaks, she listens. When she speaks, she knows who she is talking to. The same is true with God. If you recite the Our Father or the Hail Mary while thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner, that is not prayer. That is just noise. She says in chapter 28 of The Way of Perfection that you cannot address a king without understanding the nature of his position and yours. You cannot speak to a grandee without knowing the ceremonies required. So how can you speak to God, the King without end, the Emperor of all creation, while your mind is somewhere else entirely? She is brutal about this. She says if you tell her you're speaking with God while reciting the Paternoster and thinking of worldly things, words fail her. She cannot even describe how wrong that is. But when you do it right, when you pay attention, when you think about who you are addressing and what the words actually mean, something happens. Grace flows, not because you earned it, not because you are holy, but because God is faithful, because he meets you where you are. Teresa saw this happen over and over in her life. She documents case after case in her writings. In chapter 39 of her life, she writes about a Carmelite provincial who had died. She knew him. He had been her superior. He had been provincial for 20 years. 20 years of leading other people, 20 years of responsibility, and when he died, she was terrified for his soul. She knew that the cure of souls is dangerous, that authority brings judgment. She went to her oratory in great distress. She offered up to him all the good she had ever done in her whole life. She admits it was little enough, but she prayed that our Lord's merits would fill up what was lacking so that this soul might be delivered from purgatory. While she was praying, she saw him. He seemed to rise up from the depths of the earth on her right hand. She saw him ascend to heaven in exceeding great joy. He had been old when he died, but in the vision, he appeared young, around 30 years old. His face shone. The vision lasted only a moment, but she never doubted what she had seen. Then there was a nun who died in Teresa's own convent. She was 18 or 20 years old, always sickly, a great servant of God, attentive in choir. Teresa thought she would not go to purgatory at all because of her virtue and her suffering. But 4 or 5 hours after she died, while Teresa was in prayer, the Lord told her that the nun was in purgatory, suffering greatly for something that seemed like nothing, but was in fact very much against the rule. The Lord told Teresa that the nun would not leave purgatory until a mass that was to be said the following day was offered for her. Teresa was shaken. This young woman, so devout, so careful, still had to suffer, not for great sins, but for what seemed like small things. Then, the day after that mass was said, while Teresa was hearing another mass, she saw the nun's soul rise to heaven. She writes about these experiences matter-of-factly. No drama, no sensationalism, just the plain truth of what she saw. There is another story she tells in chapter 10 of her Foundations. A young gentleman approached her about founding a convent in Valladolid. He wanted to give her a house he owned. It had a large garden with a vineyard. Very valuable property. He seemed eager to help, but Teresa received a message from the Lord. The young man's salvation had been in great jeopardy. His soul had almost been lost, but he received mercy because of one thing. He had rendered service to the Blessed Mother by giving that house to become a monastery of her order. Still, he would not leave purgatory until the first Mass was said in that house. Only then would he be freed. Teresa was so conscious of the suffering of this soul that she set aside other plans. She hastened to found the house in Valladolid as quickly as she could. The license took time, permissions were slow, but finally they were granted permission to say Mass where the church would be. When the priest came with the Blessed Sacrament and Teresa approached to receive communion, the young man appeared beside the priest. She had forgotten what the Lord had told her about his soul being freed at the moment. But there he was, his face joyful, resplendent, hands folded. He thanked her for what she had done so that he could leave purgatory and go to heaven. Then he ascended. These are not fairy tales. These are recorded experiences from a woman who was eventually declared a doctor of the Church, the first woman ever given that title, along with Catherine of Siena in 1970. Teresa saw the mechanics of grace. She saw how prayers work, how masses work, how small acts of devotion to Mary can mean the difference between damnation and salvation. And she saw something else. She saw what happens when people pray with attention. She writes in chapter 30 of her life about a time when she was holding the cross of her rosary in her hand. Jesus took it from her. When he returned it, the cross had been transformed. It was now 4 large stones, incomparably more precious than diamonds. She says diamonds looked like counterfeits next to these stones. The 5 wounds were carved into them with admirable art. He told her that from then on, the cross would appear that way to her, and it did. Every time she looked at it, she saw those precious stones, but no one else could see them, only her. The cross had been made of ebony. It is not known where it is now. She gave it to her sister, Dona Juana de Ahumada. Some say the Carmelites of Madrid have it, others say Valladolid, but Teresa saw what was really there. The suffering of Christ made beautiful. The cross transformed into something beyond price. This is what happens when you pray with your whole heart. You start to see what is real. You start to perceive the supernatural breaking through the ordinary, not because you are special, but because God wants to show you. Teresa insisted that anyone can reach this level of prayer, not just nuns, not just mystics, anyone. She says in chapter 11 of her life that God wants determination. He is a friend of courageous souls who walk in humility. She had not seen any cowardly soul, or any soul that remained at the bottom under the pretense of humility. Advance as far as courageous ones do. She uses the metaphor of watering a garden. The soul is like a garden. Without water, it dies. Without prayer, the soul is dead. Vocal prayer alone, just saying prayers without attention, brings no water. It is not a relationship. There are 4 ways to water the garden. First, you can draw water from a well. This is hard work, muscle and labor. This is meditation, the beginner's prayer. You sit down, you work at it, you force your mind to focus, you draw the water up bucket by bucket. Second, you can get water with a water wheel and aqueducts. Turn the crank. The method involves less work than the first, and you get more water. This is effective prayer, the prayer of simplicity. You are starting to feel something. The heart is engaged. Third, the water can flow from a river or stream. The garden is watered much better this way. The ground is more fully soaked. There is no need to water so frequently. Much less work for the gardener. This is infused prayer. God himself is watering the garden now. You are just there, receiving. Fourth, the water comes from rain. The Lord waters the garden without any work on your part. This is mystical union. This is what Teresa experienced regularly in her later years. The awareness of God's presence every single minute. But here is the key. You cannot skip steps. You cannot go straight to the rain without learning to draw from the well. And the well is where the Rosary lives. The well is where you learn to pay attention. Teresa says in The Way of Perfection, chapter 21, that you must think about who it is you are addressing. Before you recite the Hours or the Rosary, think, who are you about to talk to? Who are you that you dare to address him? How should you behave? If a woman about to marry an earthly man is advised to learn about him, about his father, about the country where she will live, about his rank, about how to make him happy, shall less respect be paid to Christ? If a woman is fortunate when her husband is so jealous, he will allow her to speak with no one but himself. It would be strange if she could not resolve to give him this pleasure. It is reasonable that she should put up with his wishes, for it is not much to ask. Teresa is saying something radical here. She is saying that praying the Rosary with attention, with real focus on Christ and his mother, with awareness of who you are speaking to, is not optional. It is the foundation. It is the well. It is where everything begins, and she proved it with her life. After those 18 years of dryness, after she finally broke through and learned to pray with her whole self, she became one of the greatest reformers in church history. She founded 17 convents across Spain. She traveled constantly despite chronic illness. She wrote books that are still read today, 5 centuries later. She fought bishops and superiors and the Inquisition. She reformed the entire Carmelite order. All because she learned to pay attention to prayer. But there is something else Teresa saw, something darker, something that explains why this matters so much. She saw hell. In chapter 32 of her life, she writes about a vision she had while at prayer one day. It happened suddenly, no warning. She found herself plunged right into hell. She understood that the Lord wanted her to see the place the devils had prepared for her there, the place she had merited for her sins. It happened in the briefest space of time. But even if she lived for many years, she says she would never be able to forget it. The entrance resembled a very long, narrow passage, like a furnace, very low, dark, closely confined. The ground seemed full of water that looked like filthy, evil-smelling mud. In it were many wicked-looking reptiles. At the end was a hollow place scooped out of a wall, like a cupboard. It was there that she found herself in close confinement. But the sight of it was pleasant compared to what she felt there. She felt a fire within her soul, the nature of which she was utterly incapable of describing. Bodily torments so severe she could not explain them. But worse than the physical pain was the spiritual anguish. She had been put in this place that looked like a hole in the wall. Those very walls, so terrible to the sight, bore down upon her and completely stifled her. There was no light. Everything was in the blackest darkness, yet she could see everything that was painful to see. She says this vision was one of the most signal favors the Lord ever gave her. It terrified her. It broke something in her. But it also freed her from the fear of earthly troubles. What are the tribulations of this life compared to the torments of hell? They are nothing. And she understood why she had been shown this, not to terrify her into despair, but to wake her up, to make her see that souls are in danger, real danger. And prayer, real prayer, prayer with attention and love is the only weapon we have. This is why the Rosary matters. Not because it is a lucky charm, not because saying it mechanically will automatically save you, but because when you pray it well, when you think about the mysteries, when you contemplate the life of Christ and the sorrows of his mother, when you hand your heart over to God for just those few minutes, grace flows, souls are saved, the fires of purgatory are cooled, heaven opens. Teresa saw a priest celebrating Mass with 2 devils standing beside him. She writes about this in chapter 38. The devils held him tightly by the neck. She understood that the priest was in mortal sin, but at the moment of consecration, God's infinite mercy was so great that he came down into that unworthy soul's hands for the sake of the faithful who were present. The priest's soul was in darkness. But the divine light still descended. Because God's love for souls is stronger than man's sin, the sacraments work by the power of Christ himself, not by the worthiness of the minister. This is the doctrine of ex opere operato. By the work worked. Even if the priest is lost in sin, the sacrament remains valid, because God's mercy cannot be bound by human unworthiness. But Teresa also saw the other side. She saw a priest who had been one for many years. When he died, she saw his soul fall into hell as quickly as a stone cast from a great height. The sight struck her with great fear and horror. She understood that the Lord wanted her to see the punishment prepared for him. The demons seized him with fury. They carried him away. The vision lasted only a moment, but it left a terror in her soul that no words can describe. She understood that this vision was to make her know how much a single mortal sin offends God, and how fearful it is for those who live in the state of grace to fall away from it. This is why Teresa insisted so strongly that prayer must be real, that the Rosary must be prayed with attention, that you cannot just go through the motions, because souls hang in the balance. Yours, mine, the person sitting next to you in church, the priest at the altar, everyone. She saw souls in purgatory coming to her for help. She saw souls ascending to heaven after masses were said. She saw the exact moment when a soul was freed because someone prayed, because someone offered a mass, because someone did something small that heaven counted as great. One Hail Mary prayed well, one decade of the Rosary with real attention, one moment of true presence before God. It matters. It counts. It changes things in the spiritual realm that we cannot see. Teresa wrote all of this down because her superiors ordered her to. She did not want to. She says repeatedly in her writings that she wishes she did not have to talk about herself, about these visions, about these experiences, but they made her do it. They made her write it all down so that others could learn. And what did she want others to learn? That God is not far away. That prayer is not complicated. That you do not need to be a great mystic or a holy saint to pray well. You just need to pay attention. You need to think about who you are talking to. You need to mean what you say. She says in chapter 22 of The Way of Perfection that if you understood the value of saying one Hail Mary with attention, you would want to spend your whole life saying nothing else. Think about that. One Hail Mary, 10 words, 30 seconds. But if you really thought about Mary, about her purity, about her suffering, about her standing at the foot of the cross, watching her son die, about her intercession for you right now at this moment, you would say that one Hail Mary differently. You would pause over the words, you would let them sink in, you would feel them. And that is when grace comes, not in the rushing, not in the counting, not in getting through 59 beads as fast as possible, so you can say you did your Rosary today, but in the slowing down, in the attention, in the love. Teresa lived this. She tested it. She proved it over and over for 40 years after her conversion. She founded convents on it. She reformed an entire religious order on it. She wrote books on it that are still taught in seminaries today, and she left us with a very simple message. If you want to grow in holiness, if you want to help souls, if you want to experience God, you must pray. Really pray. Not just move your lips, not just count beads, but engage your whole self, your mind, your heart, your will, everything. One decade of the Rosary prayed this way is worth more than 1,000 rosaries prayed in distraction. One Hail Mary said with real love is worth more than 1,000 said by rote. God does not count quantity. He looks at the heart. Teresa knew this because she lived on both sides. She spent 18 years praying without attention, dry, empty, lost. Then she learned to pray with her whole self, and everything changed. Visions, ecstasies, mystical union. But more than that, she had peace, she had purpose, she had power. Power to reform, power to endure suffering, power to face opposition, power to keep going when everyone told her to stop. Power to build something that lasted centuries, all because she learned to pray. So when you pick up your Rosary tonight, think about Teresa. Think about the well. Think about the hard work of drawing water. Think about how the garden of your soul needs that water or it will die. And think about the fact that God is watching, waiting, ready to meet you if you will just pay attention. Do not rush, do not count, do not perform, just be there. With him, with her, with the mysteries. Let the words sink in, let the images form in your mind, let your heart respond, because that is when grace flows. That is when souls are saved. That is when heaven opens and purgatory is emptied and the kingdom of God breaks through into this broken world. Teresa understood something else that most people miss. She understood that the Rosary is not just for asking things from God. It is for becoming like Christ. She writes in the interior castle about the 7 mansions of the soul, 7 levels of increasing intimacy with God. The first 3 mansions are about purification, getting rid of sin, detaching from the world, learning to focus. The 4th mansion is where the supernatural begins. This is where God starts to act in ways you cannot produce yourself. The prayer of quiet, the prayer of union. You are no longer drawing water from the well with your own strength. The river is starting to flow. The 5th mansion is the prayer of union. Here, the faculties of the soul are completely absorbed in God. You are aware of nothing else. Time stops. You come back to yourself and realize an hour has passed and it felt like 5 minutes. Teresa experienced this regularly after her conversion. The 6th mansion is the spiritual betrothal. Here, God reveals himself more clearly. Visions become more frequent. Locutions happen often. There is great suffering in this stage because the soul sees God so clearly but cannot yet possess him fully. The longing is almost unbearable. Teresa spent years in this mansion. It was here that she experienced the transverberation of her heart. This happened when she saw an angel beside her, a small angel, most beautiful. His face was burning, as if he were one of the highest angels. She saw in his hand a long spear of gold. At the iron point, there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to be thrusting it into her heart. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw her very entrails with it and leave her all on fire with a great love of God. The pain was so great that it made her moan. Yet the sweetness of this pain was so great that she could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. This is documented in chapter 29 of her life. The 7th mansion is the spiritual marriage. This is the highest state. This is where the soul and God are united in a way that cannot be broken. Teresa reached this state in the last years of her life. She describes it as being like when 2 candles are brought so close that they become one flame, or like when rainwater falls into a river and becomes indistinguishable from the river water. The soul remains itself, but it is so united with God that separation is impossible. At this level, Teresa says, you are aware of God's presence every moment of every day. You can go about your work, talk to people, write letters, found convents, and through all of it, there's an interior awareness that God is there, always, never leaving. This is what the Rosary, prayed well, leads to. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually, step by step, decade by decade, bead by bead. The soul climbs the ladder, enters the mansions, draws closer to God, gets transformed, but you cannot skip the first steps. You cannot jump straight to mystical marriage without learning to focus your attention, and that is what the Rosary teaches. Focus, attention, presence, one mystery at a time, one bead at a time, one word at a time. Teresa knew this because she lived it. She spent those 18 years trying to pray without really paying attention. She would enter the chapel and immediately start thinking about other things. She describes it in chapter 8 of her life. She says she was more anxious for the hour of prayer to be over than she was to remain there. She spent the whole time listening for the clock to strike. She found the practice so tedious that she could not bear it, but she kept showing up, even when it felt like nothing, even when she got nothing from it, even when it seemed pointless. She kept showing up, and that is when God broke through. Not when she was feeling holy, not when she was doing everything right, but when she was at her lowest, when she had been sick for years. God came to her. He showed himself. He gave her the grace to change. The vision that changed everything happened around 1540. She was about 25 years old. She had been sick, paralyzed for a time, in terrible pain. The doctors could not help her. She had been praying to St. Joseph for healing, and slowly, over months, she recovered. But her spiritual life remained mediocre, half-hearted, divided. Then she saw the image of Christ, exe homo, behold the man, Christ crowned with thorns, wounded, suffering. And something inside her broke. She threw herself at his feet in tears. She begged him not to let her get up until he had given her the strength to stop offending him. And from that moment, everything was different. She began to pray with her whole heart. She began to pay attention. She stopped trying to divide herself between God and the world. She chose God, completely. And he responded. Within a few years, the visions started, the locutions, the raptures. But more important than any of these extraordinary experiences was the change in her character. She became courageous, determined, unstoppable. She went from being a lukewarm nun to being a reformer who would take on bishops, the Inquisition, and her own religious order. In 1562, she founded her first Reformed convent, the Convent of St. Joseph in Ávila. It took her years to get permission. The whole city opposed her. The other nuns at the Incarnation were furious. The city council tried to stop her. But she persevered, she prayed, she fought, she found allies. And on August 24th, 1562, the first Mass was said in the new convent. 4 nuns moved in. They followed the primitive rule of Carmel: strict enclosure, poverty, prayer. No visitors, no entertainment, no compromise, just God. And it worked. Other women wanted to join, other cities wanted convents. The reform spread. By the time Teresa died in 1582, she had founded 17 convents across Spain: Valladolid, Medina del Campo, Malagón, Toledo, Salamanca, Alba de Tormes, Segovia, Beas, Sevilla, Caravaca, Villanueva de la Jara, Palencia, Soria, Granada, Burgos, each one a fortress of prayer, each one a testimony to what happens when people actually pray. But it was not easy. The opposition was fierce. In 1575, a controversy erupted. Some in the Carmelite order opposed the reform. They tried to suppress it. They tried to force the nuns back. They tried to scatter them. Teresa was forbidden to found more convents. She was ordered to stay in one place. The situation became desperate. Teresa prayed. She wrote letters. She appealed to influential people. She refused to give up. And in 1580, the reform was officially recognized. The discalced Carmelites were made a separate province. They could continue. They could grow. They had won. But the battle had taken everything out of Teresa. Her health, never good, was now breaking down completely. She was in constant pain. She had chronic headaches, heart problems, fainting spells. Her body was giving out, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She founded 3 more convents in her last 2 years: Villanueva de la Jara in 1580, Palencia in 1580, Soria in 1581, Burgos in 1582. She could barely walk. She had to be carried in a wagon. But she kept going. Her last journey was from Burgos to Alba de Tormes. It was September 1582. She was exhausted, sick, bleeding. But there was a woman in Alba who needed her. So she went. The journey took everything she had left. When she arrived on September 20th, she could barely stand. She went to bed and never got up. For 2 weeks, she suffered. Bleeding internally, in terrible pain, but peaceful, at peace with God, ready to go home. On October 4th, the feast of St. Francis, she died. Her last words were recorded by the nuns around her. She said, "Lord, I am a daughter of the Church." Then she was gone. They buried her the next day. But because of the calendar reform that was happening at exactly that time, October 4th was followed immediately by October 15th. So her feast day became October 15th, even though she died on the 4th. 9 months later, they opened her coffin. Her body had not decayed. It was still whole, still flexible, still giving off a sweet fragrance. This was documented by witnesses, examined by doctors, recorded in legal documents. Her body was moved several times over the years. Each time it was found incorrupt. Today, her body rests in a chapel in Alba de Tormes. You can go there. You can see it. Hundreds of years later, still whole, still a sign, still pointing to the same truth she spent her life teaching. God is real, prayer works, grace transforms. And the Rosary, prayed with attention and love, is one of the most powerful weapons a soul can wield. This is not legend. This is not pious fiction. This is documented history. Her writings were examined by the Inquisition multiple times during her life. They were approved, they were published, they were copied and spread across Europe. Her confessors testified about her. Her spiritual directors wrote about her. The nuns who lived with her left accounts. The bishops who opposed her left records. The cities where she founded convents kept documents. We know where she was on specific dates. We know what she wrote and when. We know who she talked to. We have hundreds of her letters. We have multiple versions of her books. We have eyewitness testimonies from dozens of people who knew her personally. This is as documented as any historical figure from the 16th century. Teresa left us a trail we can follow, a path we can walk, a method we can use. And the method is simple. Pray with attention. Start with the well, draw the water, do the hard work of focusing your mind. Use the Rosary as a tool, one bead at a time. One mystery at a time. Think about what you're saying. Think about who you're talking to. Do not worry about feeling nothing. Teresa felt nothing for 18 years. Do not worry about distractions. She was distracted constantly. Just keep showing up. Keep trying. Keep meaning it as much as you can. And gradually, over time, something will shift. The water will start to flow more easily. The prayer will become less work and more gift. The presence of God will become more real. The mysteries will open up. The beads will become bridges. The Rosary will become a ladder. You will start to notice grace in your life. Small things. You will find yourself more patient, more peaceful, more aware. Temptations have less power. Fears have less grip. Things that used to dominate your thoughts start to fade. That is the water flowing. That is the garden coming to life. That is grace doing its work. And if you keep going, if you keep praying, if you keep paying attention, you will experience what Teresa experienced. Not necessarily visions, not necessarily ecstasies, but union, the awareness of God's presence, the transformation of your soul, the flowering of virtues you never thought you could have, the courage to do things you never thought you could do. That is what 1 decade of the Rosary prayed well leads to, not in one day, not in 1 week, but over a lifetime, bead by bead, prayer by prayer, day by day, until you look back and realize you are not the person you used to be. You have been changed, transformed, made new, and all because you learned to pay attention, all because you stopped rushing through prayers and started meaning them. All because you took Teresa seriously when she said that if you understood the value of saying one Hail Mary with devotion, you would want to spend your whole life saying nothing else. Teresa saw it, she documented it, she lived it, and she left it all written down for us so we would know. Prayer works, the Rosary works, but only if you do it right, only if you pay attention, only if you mean it. In 1582, Teresa died at Alba de Tormes on October 4th. She was 67 years old. She had been traveling constantly, founding convents, fighting battles, reforming communities. Her body was worn out, but her soul was on fire. They buried her. But a few years later, when they opened the coffin, her body had not decayed. It was still incorrupt, still whole. A sign that the grace that had filled her in life had not left her in death. Her body now rests in Alba de Tormes, still incorrupt, still a testament to the power of prayer and the faithfulness of God. She was canonized on March 12th, 1622. On September 27th, 1970, Pope Paul VI declared her a Doctor of the Church, the first woman ever to receive that honor. Her feast day is October 15th. Every year, Catholics around the world remember her, read her writings, try to learn from her example, and the lesson is always the same. Pray, really pray, pay attention, mean what you say, give God your whole heart, even if it is just for 1 decade of the Rosary, because that 1 decade prayed well can change everything, can save souls, can open heaven, can transform you into someone you never thought you could be. Teresa proved it. Her life is the evidence, her writings are the testimony, her incorrupt body is the seal, and her message echoes across 5 centuries, as fresh today as it was in 1577 when she wrote, "The interior castle, in the midst of opposition and suffering and doubt, God is near, prayer is powerful. The Rosary is not a ritual, it is a weapon, it is water for the dying garden of your soul, it is a ladder to heaven, it is a key to purgatory. It is a lifeline thrown to you in the darkness, but only if you use it right, only if you pay attention, only if you pray it the way Teresa did, with your whole self, with real love, with actual faith. That is the grace given for 1 simple decade of the Rosary prayed well. Not magic, not superstition, but the actual presence of God meeting you in the place where you are, filling you with what you need, transforming you into what He made you to be. Teresa saw it, now you know it too.